Probably you're wondering too, 5 years ago, what was going to happen when I walked in and did this. I've made a lion, I guess. It was good. Mac sent me a email this week that we're not always alone when we're doing things. And Mac proved that by having one of my old superintendents of school watching me do my message. And I didn't have him as a teacher or anything of that nature. He was, I was on the school board and floundering around like people do when they get on into those positions. And he helped me out tremendously. He showed me how to do budgets and how to actually work with people in the secular world, you know, because my profession was a little different at that time. And appreciate that, Mark. And I appreciate that Evan DeWitt as well. Afraid to Love is the name of this. As you know, I was waiting for Mac. Mac was going away on us tomorrow, and so I did up all the bulletins prior so Mac could have the input to put those things in. And along with that, I did 3 messages that I really wasn't prepared to do. So I hope you enjoy this message. Like I said, it's called Afraid to Love. It sounds like a line from any one of a number of Hollywood romantic comedies. Joseph, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife. Don't be afraid to get married. It's a theme of many a movie, right? Sure enough. Asian, successful urban professional has an active social life, but just can't seem to settle down with any one woman. Some of the women he dated would get together down at Starbucks and trade war stories about him. That Joseph, you know, he's a great looker. But there's just one problem with him. He got a bad case of FTC, failure to commit. Is that what happened in Nazareth long ago? Is that what the angel's talking about when he says to Joseph, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife? Does Joseph, the carpenter of Nazareth, demonstrate a failure to commit? Hardly. Hardly. We know very little about Joseph. The biblical account is pretty sparse. But what it does tell us is that he was a righteous man. Nobody back then decided whom they were going to marry. Marriages were arranged. A contract between the bride's and the groom's family. That sounds foreign to some of our ears, but that's how it was done. In the best, most loving families, the children were probably consulted after the choice had already been made. So they might have an opportunity to voice any serious objections. But again, this rarely happened. Joseph and Mary were in a period of betrothal, contracted to one another, but not actually married. They did not live together. Joseph knew he had held up his end of the bargain, remaining faithful to his intended bride. But the gradual thickening of Mary's abdomen told a different tale. It appeared to him and to all the world that Mary had been unfaithful. Had this been true, the ramifications would have been huge, because a marriage contract in that culture was an agreement not just between two people, but between two families. Mary's family would have been publicly disgraced, and Joseph would have grounds to shun him. In a village culture, this could have resulted in a feud that went on for generations and generations. And as for Mary, her situation was even more desperate. According to the law of Israel expressed in Deuteronomy, Mary could have been stoned to death for adultery. All it would have taken was a public denunciation by Joseph. The news of her pregnancy meant that he had the power of life and death over her. Had Joseph been a vengeful sort of man, he could have had a vengeful aplenty. But Joseph was a righteous man. That means his ideal was justice tempered with mercy. He would have no joy at the sight of Mary's blood on the cobblestones, only an abiding horror. And so he resolved to do the truly righteous thing, the kind thing. He would divorce her quietly. No public denunciation in the synagogue. Just a quiet conversation with a rabbi who would perhaps produce a few coins so Mary could go away for a time in another distant village and produce her child in obscurity. Should this happen, the life ahead for Joseph's fiancée would be a grim one. She might never return to Nazareth again, and if she did, she probably would eke out a hard-scrabble livelihood as a household servant. It turns out, of course, that Joseph is more than merely righteous and more than merely merciful. He's also a man who pays attention to dreams. In a famous dream of his, an angel comes to him explaining that Mary is with child by the Holy Spirit. This child she is carrying is destined to be the salvation of Israel. Do not be afraid. Joseph, do not be afraid. The fact that the angel says this shows that Joseph is afraid. What is it he could be afraid of? Well, first, he could be afraid probably it would happen again. If Mary has indeed been unfaithful to him, who's to say he won't do it again? Will he ever be able to really trust her? Well, how about second? This child growing within her is not his. Of that, he is certain. Will he ever be able to love it? Will he forever look at that child, his child's hair color, maybe his eyes, or his bone structure, and wonder which other man in the village is the real father? How about third? As a matter of public disgrace. Had Mary and Joseph broken the celibacy of their betrothal, her pregnancy would have been an embarrassment, perhaps, but no terrible scandal. Had Joseph been the father of the child, he would have probably been slapped on the back, good-natured ridicule from the other men of the village. The marriage date would probably hastily have been moved up, and it might have been a very long time indeed before you could have looked Mary's father in the eye. But they would have gotten over that. They would have gotten over that eventually. But the child is not his. How can it possibly go through with it? How can he expect any good to come out of such deeply flawed marriage? Until he hears the full story from the angel, Joseph is afraid to love. He's afraid the love he's been got to feel for Mary isn't enough to triumph over the fear, the anger, the embarrassment. For what is love anyway but a weak, pathetic emotion? Better to hide that love anyway. Better to save it for someone else. Better to take refuge in the law instead. The law will never let him down the way a lover will. Cold, reliable, unchanging. That's the law. Fickle human relationships may change, but the law of God is always and everywhere the same. Righteousness is not always the answer in a marriage. We all know of some bitter marriages that are so wrapped up in a quest for righteousness that they've left love behind, raising the dust. These are the relationships where each partner is contented to be holier than thou. Holier than thou. They bicker constantly, mostly about who's right and who's wrong. There's plenty of scorekeeping in that kind of marriage. In other marriages, exclusive victory in the righteousness contest has long since been claimed by one of the partners. Usually this is a relationship in which one partner has committed some terrible sin, an affair, perhaps, or some other relationship killing problem. Maybe an addiction to drugs or alcohol. The couple has dealt with the situation after a fashion. They put the immediate pain behind them, but there's been no real forgiveness. One partner feels deeply wounded, and the other just feels grateful the marriage didn't collapse. Righteousness has become like a dividing wall between them. And as for love, it's hard. It's very hard for that fragile flower to flourish in the shadow formed by such high wall. We usually think of righteousness as a good thing. But there are times when it takes on a life of its own, edging out a value like love, which is even more important, which is of greater value in a human relationship. Always to be right, or always to be loving? I think we all know the answer to that. Joseph's decision to choose Mary, despite the visible roundness of her belly, is a triumph of love over righteousness. He doesn't dismiss her quietly. Being a deeply loving man, he abandons that idea and decides to accept her anyway, just as she is, and to raise that baby as though he were his own family. Joseph gave up his righteousness, his precious reputation, for the sake of his beloved Mary and the child in her womb. Because he did, the world received the greatest Christmas present ever given. May this Christmas be, for all of us, a time of giving in just that same way. A time for giving the precious gift of love. Jesus is love. And on the night in which he gave himself up for you and I, he showed his love, not just because of his disciples, but because of you and I. He loves us just the same. He loves you. Don't ever forget that. For when he met in the upper room that night, he took the bread, gave thanks, gave it to his disciples and said, "Here, eat all of you. For this is my body given for you and for many." Yes, even you and I, right here, right now, in this community of believers. And then he took the cup, gave thanks, gave it to his disciples and said, "Here, drink all of you, for this is my blood poured out for you and for many." Yes, even you and I. It's a new covenant that he is making with you and I. Covenant of salvation. He truly is love. Truly is love. Today, when you take communion, think of the love that Jesus has for you. What he has done for you. What he will do for you. A lot of us feel that we're not worthy enough to take communion. I don't know of anyone here that is worthy to take communion. But he doesn't care. Because he loves you. He gave everything for you. For those that wish may come forward to receive the body and blood of Christ.